Hey everyone, Zoraz here from NotCasuals, and today I'm bringing you my ultimate Hu Tao character guide, where I will showcase to you how I build her, as well as give you all the gameplay tips that you need to know on which best artifacts are suited for her, as well as some of the best weapon options, and a lot of team comp tips, as I think Hu Tao is probably one of the most versatile characters to have ever been introduced in Genshin Impact. She can work in many different comps and can fulfill multiple roles, such as burst support, main DPS, as well as being literally the cutest character I have ever seen in a video game. Now, I think that Hu Tao is currently the best power character in the game, and she is also very free-to-play friendly. She can do huge amounts of damage using simply 4-star free-to-play gear, as well as 0 Constellation. The gameplay that you are seeing right now on the screen is made with my Hu Tao, who is using a 4-star weapon and absolutely no Constellation. So this just showcases how amazing of a character she is. She also has one of the best dodge animation in the game, with an iframe that seems a little bit longer than other characters, but also goes through mobs. And she is, in my opinion, currently probably the best character in the game in terms of fun to play, high damage, well fitting in most team comps, and just... Now, I've been doing a lot of research in the past few days about this character's best artifacts, best abilities, best team comps, and all that kind of stuff, and there is a lot of information. There are an infinite amount of possibility with this character, and there's also an absurd amount of different builds that work. The vast majority of weapons work well on her. The vast majority of artifact sets work well on her. So a lot of this is going to be obviously subjective and will be different from player to player depending on what you have available for you. So I'll just give you a general consensus of what I have found from all the tier crafting and testing. But make sure to play this character the way you like, with the characters you like, because no matter what, she will do well. And ultimately, this is a single player game meant for you to have fun. And you don't really need to min-max DPS in this game, as the content is quite easy once you have good gear. So first, let's talk about her abilities and talents. Now, her normal attack is a pretty standard spear attack. It has a very high attack speed, and it also has a very good scaling of damage. Also, her charge attack is one of her most powerful moves, which also has a very good scaling. Now, there's nothing new about this, but when we go and look at her skill, Guide to Afterlife, this is where everything changes. Now, this is an ability similar to Child, where when you activate it, she enters the Paramita Papilio state, which basically turns all of her damage pyro, as well as converts a percentage of her max HP into attack bonus. This cannot be more than 400% of Hu Tao's base attack, which usually means that with most 4-star weapon, you could have between 35,000 and 40,000 HP before this becomes irrelevant. So this is a lot of HP to have, and if you have a 5-star weapon, it goes up to 50, 60,000. So it is going to be pretty hard to have max HP and have over this 400%. But just to keep in mind, there's also a lot of sheets out there that showcases you exactly how much HP you can have. Now, one other thing that this does is that your charge attacks will apply the Blood Blossom effect to enemies hit. Now, the Blood Blossom effect is similar to Child's Riptide, where you will put a debuff on an enemy, and that enemy will take power damage every 4 seconds. Now, that damage right now at level 9 ability is 109%, and it lasts for 8 seconds, so the Blood Blossoms will proc twice. Now, lastly, this ability has a duration of 9 seconds and a cooldown of 16 seconds, which means that there are 7 seconds in between where she doesn't have that state, where she doesn't do that much damage. And this is where you're gonna have your supports or alternate burst DPS come in for that 7 seconds to fill this time with buffs or more damage. It is also good to note that the activation cost of this is 30% of her HP, so this will cause her HP to go down significantly, but that is a good thing considering her passive, which makes it so that when her HP is equal or less than 50%, she gains 33% power damage bonus. Now, the way this works in practice is, as you can see, if you do your spear attack like this, you have 6 attacks, and it is going to be physical damage, and this is her charge attack. Now, when I press E, you can see my HP goes down, and now I have this fire aura around me. Now, all of these attacks are all infused with pyro, which is very good, as well as the charge attack also being infused with pyro. Now, you can see that if I activate my E and I go and do a charge attack on this monster, he now has the Blood Blossom on him, and you can see that it will take 4 damage over time. Right now, it's hitting for about 3,000. It can do much higher, of course, depending on crits and if you're lower than person HP. And that is ultimately how it works. So you basically just activate your E, and do a lot of damage AoE. Use some charge attacks, you put the debuffs on enemies, and then you just melt their faces on. As you can see, it's quite powerful. Now, moving on to her ultimate, Spirit Suitor is a very high damage AoE ult that basically will summon her ghost, and around her, she will hit all enemies in a large AoE and do power damage to them. She will also heal a percentage of her max HP depending on how many enemies are hit, and this healing can be triggered only up to 5 enemies hit, but the damage can hit more than 5 enemies. Now, if her HP is lower than 50%, this will also do more damage and heal for more. Now, if you look here, the skill damage right now at level 6 is 400%, and if she's low HP, it is almost 500%, so it is a quite big difference if you ult while low HP, and the healing is 8.25 up to 11.0, which means that if you hit 5 enemies when she's low HP, she will heal for 55% of her max HP. Now, this is something you want to be careful of because, of course, you do not want to heal over 50% HP too often if you are playing for that build, but usually, people will be using this ult at the end of her elemental skill, where she is going to be low HP. They will heal slightly over 50%, but then when they go back to this ability and cast it, they will drop by 30% again. Now, this has 15 seconds cooldown and energy cost of 60, but she has so much energy regeneration when she is in her E stance that she is never really having any issues keeping up with having this up all the time. Now, obviously, when you're going to be casting her ult, it is going to be best to try and vaporize or melt it for extra damage, and you want to be in your E state in order to do more damage and lower than 50% HP. This is what it will look like. Of course, 114,000 damage on a Vaporize with no buffs other than having Bennett in my party but not being in his ult. So it is a very high damaging ult, and it is going to be very, very powerful. Now, her last passive talent will make it so that after your Guide to Afterlife aura is over, you will then give your entire party 12% crit rate for 8 seconds, excluding herself. So that means that all your other characters in your party are going to be buffed. So when you press E, when this runs out, I can now switch to my other characters, and you see all these little arrows. That means that their crit rate is boosted. Now, when the crit rate boost ends, you go back to Hu Tao, her E is back up. So basically, at all times, she will always be able to buff her teammate, and then once that's done, she will be ready to take the field on again. This creates a insanely powerful team combinations with Hu Tao. Now, as far as her constellations go, of course, as you can see, I have no constellation, so all the footage you see is completely C0, and she is probably one, if not the most viable 5-star character with 0 constellation in the game right now, as her constellations are good buffs, but they are not game-changing as much as some other characters such as Child or Xiao or Ganyu, for example. Now, her best constellations, in my opinion, are her first 2 constellations. This first one makes it so that she does not consume stamina when doing charge attack during her E ability. So this is obviously very good, as her charge attack is a very powerful ability that does a lot of damage, so having no stamina is great, though it is not required, because obviously if you are not sprinting around too much, you will have only a 9 seconds window to cast charge attacks, and in that 9 seconds window you can cast a lot of charge attacks without having any stamina issues or running out of stamina. And also, it is good to note that her charge attacks are kind of a dodge in a way, because they move her so far away from her targets, which means that she will often prevent herself from taking damage and will not need to dodge as much. It is still an amazing constellation if you can afford it or if you're lucky enough to have it, but it is not required by any means. Her second constellation is probably the biggest buff that she has in her kit. It will increase the damage of Blood Blossom by 10% of her max HP, so it is obviously going to almost double the damage of Blood Blossom in some situation, and probably more in really well-geared characters. As well as Spirit Suitor will also apply the Blood Blossom effect, which means that her ult will, hitting all the enemies around it AoE, will put Blood Blossom on all of them. This is absolutely tremendous of a buff, because the Blood Blossom will last for 8 seconds, and then when you switch to other characters, they will still have the Blood Blossom on them. The enemies will be able to get hit by Vaporize and all that kind of stuff. So this can create a lot of extra combos and a lot of extra damage just passively. But again, this is an increase in damage. It is not a mandatory thing that changes the way she plays. It is just going to make you hit harder and do more damage. But with the current state of the game, with good gear, Hu Tao already 2-shots literally everything that exists, so this is not required, just a great buff in general. Her fourth constellation is very, very powerful. It makes it so that when an enemy with Blood Blossom dies, all the party members of Hu Tao will gain another 12% crit rate for 15 seconds. Now, of course, if you have C2, this will happen all the time. So you will basically have a permanent 12% crit rate for your entire party. Sadly, it excludes Hu Tao herself, but still, for the same reason that her other 12% buff when her E ends is good, this will make it so that basically when she's not on the field, everybody has 24% crit rate permanently, which is absolutely insane because crit rate is a super high value. Now, her Constellation 6 is really interesting, but it will really rarely happen for the 5 of you who will actually be able to pay enough money to unlock this. It will mean that she will basically not die when she drops below 25% HP or suffers a lethal strike. This can happen once every 60 seconds. So every 60 seconds, you basically can die and actually not die. She gains a lot of buffs instead for the next 10 seconds afterwards. And it is going to be very interesting. But for the people who will be able to unlock this, it means that you are definitely a whale, and if you are a whale, it is going to be very rare that any monsters you fight will survive long enough for any of these buffs to apply, but in any case, this is still a quite interesting constellation, and I look forward to unlocking this maybe one day when bitcoins are worth $100,000 each. Now, as far as artifacts are concerned, there has been a lot of debate about what is best on her. Now, the majority of the tier crafters from the Hu Tao main subreddit and discords agree that 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames is her best option in most situations. Now, of course, the 15% power damage is insane, and it is one of the best things you can get on her, as well as the 4-piece set gives another stack of this. Now, this can have a maximum 3 stacks when you cast your E, but obviously Hu Tao's E has a long cooldown, so you can only really get 1 stack of this at any time. 1 stack of this is still 7.5% power damage, which is still very valuable. On top of that, increase the damage of Overload, Burning, Vaporize, and Melt is very significant. 40% damage on Overload is worth 90 Elemental Mastery, and 15% damage on Vaporize and Melt is also worth 80 Elemental Mastery, which makes this 4-piece set bonus one of the best that you can get in terms of value, especially because most Hu Tao comps will be using Overload, Vaporize, and Melt very often to maximize the damage potential of this character. So this is going to be one of the most no-brainer options if you want to just have the best amount of damage and are using a lot of elemental combos. Now, another set that is very variable on her would be the Retracing Bolide. Of course, this is a set that will be very useful, especially for the 4-piece, which gives you 40% normal and charge attack damage, which is the majority of her damage. Now, this does not boost her Blood Blossoms, nor does it boost her ultimate damage, which is a bit sad, but nonetheless, this is still going to be very powerful. Not as good as Crimson Witch, but if you are going to play her in a team comp with Zhongli or 2 Geo for the Geo Resonance, which is absolutely amazing on her, it will still be one of the best sets you can use on her. Now, another option, of course, Lava Walker 4-piece increases the damage dealt against opponents affected by PYRO by 35%. Now, this is obviously very powerful. Sadly, Lava Walker is one of those sets that is more situational, as a lot of mobs in this game are immune to being affected by PYRO, such as slimes, as well as it is hard to keep PYRO on enemies at all times if you are playing Hu Tao in a team comp that uses a lot of elemental combos. So if you're melting, overloading, or vaporizing all the time, which is ultimately the best way to do damage on Hu Tao, you will be consuming the PYRO element quite often, which means that you will be attacking a mob without having this buff quite often as well, and you'll be having to reapply PYRO to get this buff again, which can be not optimal in some situation. But if you are going to build your party around this set and you are going to be using it very optimally, this will still provide a very good amount of damage, though Crimson Witch of Flames tests higher than Lava Walker in all the tier crafting documents that I have seen so far. Now, another possibility is you could do 2-piece Crimson Witch of Flames for the PYRO bonus, and you can do 2-piece Noblesse Oblige for the elemental burst damage. This will be better for teams where Hu Tao is really used as a burst support but not as the main DPS, as the Crimson Witch of Flames will still provide much more damage than this, as it still boosts the ult and the melt and the vaporize, which are also doable with the ult and will ultimately provide a lot more damage than this 2-piece, but this is still a decent option. You can also, instead of the Noblesse, can have 2-piece Gladiator for 18% attack, though this is not as good again as the 4-piece Crimson because her base attack is very low and attack values on her are not as good as other values, especially since considering all the bonuses of the 4-piece Crimson. But again, this is still going to be very decent, especially if your artifacts have really good substats. It is always going to provide more value if you have a godly rolled artifact with substats than if you are using a main set that has really bad rolls. So if you have really good gladiators or really good noblesse, it is perfectly fine to use them and you will have very, very strong Hu Tao nonetheless. Now, as far as the stat priorities on these items go, you will most likely want to have HP on the sands, as it is what tests the highest, though attack is also not that far behind. And Elemental Mastery can also provide very good value here over HP or attack if you have the right build for it. And of course, if you have Staff of Homa, HP is by far the best. Now, on here, Pyro Damage is the only option. There is nothing else here. You must have Pyro Damage on the Goblet. And if you go to the Circlet, crit rate or crit damage are obviously going to be both very good. I personally went with crit rate because I have absolutely no crit rate on any other substats. So I do need some crit in order to make her work. You can go for crit damage, and you can also go for HP here, because HP also scales very well with her, especially if you have Staff of Homa. So this will be depending on your gear level and what you have available, though all of these will work very well here no matter what. Now, talking about weapon, I myself am using Dragon's Bane. I am building Hu Tao with a Vaporize and Melt comps, and I am going to be using the Elemental Mastery build to do insane amount of damage, and it is ultimately one of the best 4-star weapon if you have it at refinement rank 5, as well as if you are going to build Hu Tao in a team comp that will make her vaporize and melt consistently. This tests higher than any other 4-star weapon in that specific situation, which is exactly what I'm doing. Now, your other options for Hu Tao will be Deathmatch, the BP weapon, which is ultimately the best 4-star all-rounder weapon. If you have that weapon, it is tremendously good and you will do very well with it. As well as Black Cliff, which can be bought in the Star Glitter. It is a very close seconds to Deathmatch, and in some situations can even be better. Now, of course, it will depend a lot on the way you play, whether you're playing Dragon's Bane, Deathmatch, Black Cliff, or even Lithic Spear. If you have 4 characters in your party from Leeway, this will be ultimately one of the best weapons as well. It will really depend on what you have available. All 4 of these 4-star weapons test super close to each other and will completely be dependent on the way you are building your party around Hu Tao. And no matter what, all of these weapons will be viable and will be completely usable. So really just go for whichever one you want to use, or you have the highest refinement level on, or you prefer to use. It really doesn't matter that much. It is going to be all good. Now, another option is the White Tassel. It has actually tested higher than some of the 4-star weapons in a lot of situations, simply because it gives a buff of normal attack damage by 30%, and this is refinement rank 2 only. So if you have a R5 White Tassel, it is actually going to be one of the best weapons, though it does not boost charge attacks. So in some situation, this will not work as well, but it is a very, very good and her best 3-star option. And in some cases can even be better than some 4-star. Now, of course, 5-star weapons are all going to be better on her than the 4-star weapons, especially the Staff of Homa. Staff of Homa is her best in slot. There is nothing better than Staff of Homa for Hu Tao. It is ultimately the best weapon on her, and it also has an effect where if you're lower than 50% HP, you gain even more attack based on the HP. It is very, very good. It is made for her and it is her weapon. So if you have it, you have to use it on her. It is obviously the #1 choice. Otherwise, literally all other 5-star weapon polearms for Hu Tao are very viable. Skyward Spine being the worst of them all, but still being very good. Though in my case, I prefer Dragon's Bane with my EM build over it, as it is a little bit better in what I've seen so far, but it really is not that far off. There is very not much difference between all the weapons, other than Staff of Homa, who obviously is tremendously better than all other weapons. Literally all other 5-stars are very close together, and then all the 4-stars are also very close together. So you really cannot go wrong when using any of these weapons on her. Whichever weapon you have, you can make work on her. It will just depend on the gameplay style that you would like to do. Now, in terms of team comps and tips, she is, as I said many times already, one of the most versatile characters to build in any party. Of course, Shinshu is probably her best support to play with because he will enable a lot of Vaporize, as well as being just ultimately one of the best characters in the game to go with anyone. So it is going to be very, very good to play him with Hu Tao, and it is what most people are going to do when building Vaporize comps as well as freeze comps or EM builds, which is what I'm doing myself. Now, I also really like to play Child with her because the good thing about Child is that he also has a E with a long cooldown after being used. So I can alternate between Hu Tao and Child for like 7-8 seconds on each characters and do insane amounts of damage while never having any downtime at all. I also have Constellation 4 on my Child, which means that the Riptides stay on enemies when I attack. Now lastly, I am using Bennett in my party. Of course, my Bennett is C6, which means that he is very, very powerful to play with Hu Tao by both turning her attacks into Pyro if she doesn't have her E up, but also giving her 15% damage while she is standing inside his ult, and an insane amount of attack buff while standing in the ult. Though the one downfall of this is that obviously Bennett will be healing her over 50% HP, but because I do not have the Staff of Homa, it is actually providing more damage to stand inside of Bennett's ult while attacking monsters than it is to attack monsters with low 50% HP, simply from how much damage Bennett gives her from his C6 as well as from his attack buff. But of course, it will be different for everyone. I also am really a big fan of the Power Resonance for this team, which increases the attack by 25%, which can work well with all the attack buffs that she also is getting from her E and from Bennett. But it is by no means the only build you can do. There are so many ways to build her. You could very easily do a build with 2 Geo characters to get all these bonus from shield strength to extra damage while shielded, which will work very, very well when using some of the characters such as Zhongli, Ningguang, Albedo, even Noelle. This will provide absolutely amazing. You can do 2 Geo, 2 Pyro. You can do 2 Geo, 1 Pyro, 1 Hydro, like Chinchu, for example. There's really so many ways you can do this. There's also a build which Hu Tao will be using the 4-piece Thundering Fury, which will make it so that when you cause overloads and electro charge, you will be triggering an effect that reduces her elemental skill cooldown by 1 second, which ultimately will make it so that Hu Tao has absolutely no cooldown on her E. So this is a very specific build that also works very well because Hu Tao then becomes your main DPS with absolutely no downtime in her abilities, and will do obviously tremendous amount of damage with the amount of electricity damage that Fischl and Beidou provide, as well as all the overloads, which do also a lot of damage. So as I said, there is really so many ways to build this character. You can put her in so many teams. You can have Gone Yu here as well for a support role, which using her ult and icicles with a lot of enemies can create an insane amount of melts. You can also use Chongyun as another burst DPS to come in and out of her team. You can also use Ningguang here instead of Child, where Ningguang will do a burst amount of damage too, and then you'll switch to Hu Tao. So you'll have basically always huge amount of burst coming out of every character in this team. It is absolutely insane the amount of team comps that you can do. Sucrose, Venti also work very well with their Verdance and Venereer, as well as all of their CC and AoE. There really isn't any character that I can think of that doesn't work well with Hu Tao in some way, shape, or form. So really, you should go for what you find interesting. Just make sure that, of course, you are going to be building Hu Tao's artifacts and weapons based on the team that you are going to be using with her. So it is going to be, of course, recommended to try and get some Hydro or Cryo characters for Melt, or Electric character for Overloads, to really get the maximum output of damage from Hu Tao. Now lastly, I want to mention also about the healing. Of course, I am using Bennett in my team because I am preferring that for my gameplay. But you do not always want to be using a healer, as you do not want to be over the 50% HP, because especially if you have the Staff of Homa, you will be losing a lot of damage if you are over 50% HP. So another great option for healing with Hu Tao would be Diona. Now Diona can be built with a shield build. If you max a lot of HP on her, her shield will be having a lot of HP, which will mean that you can shield Hu Tao at low HP but still never die. So this is one of the best healers for her. And then you also have access to her ult when you want to heal the rest of your team. Now another option here would be obviously Zhongli, which I personally do not have, but Zhongli is probably one of those characters to play with Hu Tao, because by the amount of shielding that he has, considering how OP he is now, he will basically make it so that anyone with his shield is unkillable, which is perfect for Hu Tao. And it is going to be an easy way to never go over 50% HP. Now the same can be done with a lot of characters. Characters such as Chenyan or Noelle can also be used for their shielding capabilities. And if you shield well enough, you will very rarely be taking any damage. You can also use Barbara if you want to have some healing on demand where you're really low HP. You can top off yourself and then press E again on Hu Tao to go back down to low HP. So there's really going to be a lot of ways to build her. But ultimately, I think shielding characters are going to be one of the best way to ensure that she stays below 50% HP. And in cases where you are like me and you do not have Staff of Homa, using a very strong Bennett will ultimately provide more bonuses than fighting low HP. So that is something you can do as well, which is personally what I am doing. So guys, that's about it for my Hu Tao guide. Of course, she is going to be such a versatile character that we're going to be seeing a lot of different team comps, a lot of different ideas. There is really not many wrong ways of playing her, and ultimately this is a single player game with very low difficulty scaling, so you can really do whatever you like. She is probably going to be one of the most fun and most easy to put in a team character that we've seen in a long time. So just enjoy yourself, play her with whoever you like. And make sure to let me know what is your favorite team comp with her in the comments, as I am very interested to keep trying out new things and keep trying her out in different comps in my own team. Make sure to check the description below for some interesting links on tier crafting and charts on what weapon is best for her and so on, as well as we have over 25 different character guides with over 10 million total views on them to check out. So if you're interested in building any other characters, make sure to check those out. They will all be in the description below. We also have giveaways on our Discord every month. Right now we're giving away battle passes and welcome moons, so make sure to join our Discord community for some of that action. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.